Well, it still is not going great today. Wonderful. Hello, everyone. I know you can hear me. I know you can hear me. You may not be able to see me today, but I know you can hear me. One moment as I get this fixed. Stupid fucking computer. That hurt. Let's see. Let's see how we get this moving. Come on. Everything is breaking for me today. This has been a very bad luck day for Brooks. Bad luck day for Brooks, to say the least. Be one moment. Alright, I'll play some music while you guys are waiting. Put you back on the screen. There we go. Hello, everyone. Apologies for that delay and sort of a bumpy start as it happens. It's been a fun week. Today we are continuing our reading of Pierre Klossowski's Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle. I have us, we kind of went a little bit into the new paragraph, but I'm actually going to move us back a little bit and kick back a little bit because I think it's worth revisiting and going back over most of that. I have it shared here. Then let me. Wonderful. No. Fuck off. Why is this not letting me move around? There it is. Okay. I think I'm going to restart us here. Unless anyone has any notes or any questions or comments or anything like that. YouTube, for some reason, is still fucked up for me, and I'm waiting on YouTube's end. It's actually on their side of things, which is beyond frustrating. I have apparently a stream that didn't disconnect properly. And it's got to cycle through. I don't even know at this point. So I can't look at who's commenting and how. I've got very little I can do on my side before it gets completely broken. And it's very weird and confusing for me, and I don't know why. So all I've got is YouTube chat on the normal YouTube side. So I will be doing my best to be looking down on my phone and all of that, as you do. As you do. So I'm here. I don't know what the fuck is going on. Fucking YouTube's just broken lately. So yeah, frustrating few days, to say the least. That's okay. The next couple days I'll be spending figuring this out. I can't do live streams. Hello? Who's that? LJ, we can hear you. Coming through.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. At least I can hear you this time. So it's at least I can hear you this time. It's a bit of a better start than last time. What can I say? To say the least. So I guess we just will begin and dive in. Okay. Nietzsche, through Klossowski, we've been going through the way that the fluxion, the interaction of the forces, the impulses, the waves of things, how they come together and how they build into what we understand as understanding, how understanding is literally built out of these very moments. We are talking about, again, just to go back over it, we're going to be going through it a little bit more, but we're going over the intensities of experience that produce experience, intensities themselves, the flux and reflux, the way that fluxion or the change of a thing becomes its own awareness of it through an odd split and intermingling. The previous paragraph, as he's been going through, just to state, and it's a bit of a humorous sort of aside, but I'm just going to take from it, and it's right. Oh, fuck, this is just going to be frustrating to me today. My computer's doing nothing I want. If in natures as apparently limited and closed as our own, there still exists something open enough to make Nietzsche invoke the movement of waves. It is because, notwithstanding the sign in which the fluctuation of intensity culminates, the signification, because it exists only through an afflux, can never absolutely disengage itself from the moving chasms it masks. Every signification remains a function of chaos, out of which meaning is generated. 2 seconds. Sorry, pulling up my notes. This is just, I have so much written on this and I don't want to go too far off the fucking lines on it. And it would be very easy to do. Okay. Nietzsche, as he speaks of waves, as he's talking about the waves of the ocean, when he's writing about them, he writes, "You and I, we are of the same origin, the same race." Klossowski takes this as Nietzsche seeing the waves, the way that the waves, while not actually moving the movement of water, the waves are themselves the thing Nietzsche is attached to, that he's seeing himself born in. The idea being that there is a dynamism to the chaos of everything. And this intensive dynamism yields through us a becoming, a becoming of the human. The way this works is that we have the waves of things, again, impulses, the waves of water. This is so fucking, I'm so tired. I'm so sorry. This has just been a very fucking frustrating day. I found out a really good friend of mine died, so I'm kind of just dealing with that, and my brain is not wanting to do this fucking reading. As happens, what can I say? So it's just, I'm a bit more distracted than usual, to say the least. But I do want to do the reading, because it's a good distraction for me. Let's actually just move on and do the reading. That'll probably be the best way for me to just do this rather than trying to summarize. The big thing to carry forward is that we are doing away with metaphysics effectively as sort of a traditional category, at least as we're talking through it through Klossowski here. We're about to talk about intensities and chaos, and the chaos of everything. Not the chaos of the things we understand, oh my God, the world's in chaos, but instead there is a fundamental chaos, an unknowable, unnameable, unstructured whole that is everything. This unstructured whole has ebbs and flows, has movement within it. This movement is not itself a thing, just like the waves of water that we see in an ocean is not actually water moving forward. The wave seems like it's moving forward, but the water's not actually moving forward. It's an illusion. But the way that that wave is existing is through all the complex vibrations of everything that is involved with the ocean, from wind to underground currents to vibrations to fucking fish or temperature eddies, the shift in temperature between upper and lower parts of the ocean and the way that makes water move. These things produce the waves of the ocean. The waves of the ocean itself, though, is not the actual movement of water. It's an illusion there. And these illusions stack on each other, interfere with each other, and build forward. And as they do, they seem to form something more. And that seems to form something more is the sort of big deal. As they collide, they form froth, and then the froth of the waves, just like with the ocean, we take to mean things. We take to understand things. If you've never seen it, where Aphrodite was born, supposedly where Aphrodite was born, again, it's a myth, but it's off the coast of Cyprus. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's this stunningly beautiful sea foam. It's the first time I understood why they called that color in the crayon box sea foam. It's beautiful, but it has this odd froth to it that is sort of left behind by the waves as proof they were here. And that's kind of how we take them. And these froths are, as he says, designations through which the intensity signifies itself. This is what we call froth. This is what we call thought. This is the thing that is sort of left behind that seems as it. But we, humans, we do this, and even in our limited nature, we still see something in waves. Something about us, something that's making us, something that's part of us, something that is in us, even in our limited nature. It's a really a beautiful piece, but we're going to just actually get right to it. Because this is the next big section. We did this last week, but I think it's worth going over because we had a whole bunch of questions, and I think I've had a chance to reread it, and I want to kind of go back over ways I was phrasing stuff, and ways that we were talking about things. I think it'll help. The opening here. Intensity is subject to a moving chaos without beginning or end. Thus, in each person apparently has their own possession. There moves an intensity, its flux and reflux, forming significant or insignificant fluctuations of a thought that in fact belongs to no one, with neither beginning nor end. This is a pretty significant way to deviate from how traditionally we tend to think of thinking, and that's what he's going straight at here. Generally speaking, the normative position on what thought is that you are kind of a thinking being. I think, therefore I am. I think as an operant thing itself. That is what I do. I'm constantly thinking. But that's not really it. Thinking is produced through one thing or another, through one setup or another. And that thing we're going through, that individual subjectivity, is preceded and exceeded by this intensity. The moving chaos without beginning or end is this, like Noah was making the comment that this is his pre-Socratic inheritance. This is Heraclitus, right? This is the flux from that. But it's playing through this, with Klossowski, this sort of post-phenomenological sort of framework as a thing. He's doing this because the way he's talking about it, it's not just an uncertainty about origins. Oh, the chaos, so we can't know it, or this or that. It's not any of those things, right? Instead, this is an assertion that this intensive process is the primary and stable identity that we have, the stability that is produced by it that seems to be there, that foam, like I was talking about, that sea foam that seems to be stable and consistently there. It's not. It's a secondary derived effect of that first thing. The way he phrases this opening, and it's why I sort of dig this. Let me, one sec, I have to turn off notifications. I keep getting pinged on my goddamn phone. 1 second. Someday YouTube will get their stupid shit figured out. Someday, not today though. The way he opens up with, thus in each person apparently as their own possession, their moves and intensity, it's apparently as their own possession is going to be really important in doing a lot of heavy lifting here. The idea that you're in possession, or you has a consciousness are in possession, that I think therefore I am, cogito, Cartesian, Kantian, like tradition of philosophy, is the ground of experience, that I think I am. Perhaps instead, as he says, it's apparently as their own possession, but it's actually that the intensive flows are traversing your person. They're moving across this without question. You are a site of temporary stability, of meta stability that's taking place inside of that. And this flux and reflux that is sort of driving these things, this resonance that's flowing in and out of these different elements. These are impersonal rhythms. These aren't voluntary acts that you're doing. You're not choosing to think. You're not choosing to choose. That these are working through you. You are produced by them. You are a metastable position in that. Klossowski phrased it earlier, and because he likes how Nietzsche talks about this, that forces think through individuals. It's a great wording that he's used for that I really like. Forces think through individuals, like you're the vessel for that. Now the longer paragraph that sort of carries on from that. Thanks for the nice notes, by the way. It's been a long day. I didn't know. I hit up a few people, two guys who kind of semi-mentored me in work about 12 years, 13 years ago now. I hit up a couple of them last night. One didn't reply. And I asked about him today and found out that he died last year. And what happens when you don't keep up with people. So it was depressing. Now to read this though. But if, contrary to this undulating element, each of us forms a closed and apparently delimited whole, it is by virtue of these traces of signifying fluctuations, that is to say, a system of signs that I will here call the code of everyday signs. It's an important term for the rest of this book. As to where our own fluctuations start or stop, so that the signs can permit us to signify, to speak to ourselves and others, we know nothing, except that there is one sign in this code that always corresponds to either the highest or lowest degree of intensity, namely, the self, the I, the subject of all our propositions. It is thanks to this sign, which nonetheless is nothing but an always variable trace of fluctuation, that we constitute ourselves as thinking, that a thought as such occurs to us, even though we are never quite sure if it is not others who are thinking and continue to think in us. But what is this other that forms the outside in relation to this inside we believe ourselves to be? everything is led back to a single discourse, namely, two fluctuations of intensity that correspond to the thought of everyone and to no one. I dig it. All right. There. Got a little bit of, volume's back. I don't know why Windows keeps doing that. And the reading does help. It helps my brain sort of work sideways. It's a whole thing. So, for the better part of this section, and it's a big one, Klossowski's been talking through Nietzsche about ontology, effectively. What the stuff is that is making things, how things are made, stuff like that. The thing he's making move here to is a semiotics. And he's got some really, really particular phrasing that is going to kind of come through here. That I want to focus on a handful of terms that are going to be important through this paragraph, and then we'll sort of dive through. The first is traces. If you've joined our anti-Oedipus readings or read any Deleuze or Guattari post their meeting, this is a phrase you will be more familiar with. This isn't the Derridian trace. This is a different thing. This is Klossowski, Deleuze, and Guattari's traces or recordings. This is not the flux itself. The forces don't actually exist as traces. That's not really the thing. What he's driving at is the traces are produced as sort of this secondary effect. There's some of this in a logic of sense. There is some of this in logic of sense as well. Yeah, but this is more recording surface kind of thing. Recording surface. Traces, recording over and over and over. Again, not fluxes themselves, but the traces of them. And the traces of them, the same way that we talked about seafoam, and the position of the seafoam, or where it sits, or how it sits, or the color of it, or the outline of it, whatever it is, the repetition of this, the trace of it over and over, produces a sort of bounded selfhood inside of this thing. And this is a shift from, just so very much. This is a very materialist semiotic structure. It's not sitting inside of the space of ideality. It's very material based, right? Signs as they exist don't represent subjects that already exist or the thoughts of those subjects. Instead, the sign system produces the subject, right? The other phrase that's important in there is the code of everyday signs. And everyday is quotidien. When we talk like everyday, the normative, the normal, when we say everyday signs, it's not the stuff you see literally every day, but it's the colloquial everyday signs. The stuff you see every day, common, exactly. The code of everyday signs is distinguished significantly here. This is everyday communication. When you talk to people, when you gesture at stuff, the everyday signs, stuff that you use commonly. These social elements that are sort of there are a big part of this. And again, the rest of this. So as he goes, we'll get through this, but those are sort of the two things. It's anti-metaphysics, materialist, and it is anti-metaphysic. It's really a lot of people, and I take Lacan, Zizek, others, and they may say that they're materialists in their own way, but a lot of their sort of ideality comes from this presumption of the subject pre-existing, or that there is pre-existing meaning, a negative in some cases, or entire structures in others that pre-exist the subject that are building things out, or that the subject is part of it, and from the subject we get language and that setup. That's Klossowski is squarely against that. So are Deleuze and a bunch of others. That language is part and parcel, if not constitutive of what the subject is. And so that's so to go. But if, contrary to this undulating element, the flux and reflux, the waves of things, each of us forms a closed and apparently delimited whole, it is by virtue of these traces of signifying fluctuations. That is to say, a system of signs I will here call the code of everyday signs. What he's phrasing on and what he's sort of playing with is how the subject appears. Again, each of us forms a closed and apparently delimited whole. If contrary to this element, each of us does this, it is by virtue of the traces of this. It is by virtue of a system of signs that he's calling the code of everyday signs. These elements that stabilize this chaos into a recognizable, exchangeable, communicable identity. Things that can be communicated, you might call social elements and things like that. Because the subject appears to be, and it's fair, it appears to be, and a lot of philosophers have talked about it this way, that the subject is closed or delimited, and the intensive flux is anything but closed and delimited. It's open. But the reason that closure exists is by virtue of the traces of the flux that is open. Closure isn't opposition to openness. It's a particular mode of organization. It is extensivity rather than intensivity. It is molar, not molecular. It is gregarious, not minor. It is the difference is the organism versus the machine, the machinic. These signifying fluctuations aren't really present. They're not really a thing in and of themselves. They play with differences between each other. They play with the derivative. The rate of change between these traces play very, very differently. He's going to say that in a second. He goes on to say, as to where our own fluctuations start or stop, that's the big thrust here, as to where our own fluctuations start or stop, so that the signs can permit us to signify, to speak to ourselves and others, we know nothing, except that there is one sign in this code that is always corresponds to either the highest or lowest degree of intensity, namely the self, the I, the subject of all our propositions. The boundaries of our flux, like the fluctuations that like produce us, the boundaries of that are not knowable. That's not really a thing. We don't get to know where our fluctuations start or stop. There's no beginning or ending that's ours. I used to, during our AO readings, ask where you end and the world begins. Because how we interact with the world, if I read a sticky note and I put it somewhere, and then I see that sticky note later and I remember something and it triggered, how is that not part of my brain? Well, how do you determine that your body ends at the end of your skin if you're using the keyboard to type and you're seeing with the computer? Is this not part of the apparatus that is you? Where is the edges of just the body, let alone the intensities, the fluctuations that supposedly are what produce you? You can't know the edges of it. You don't even get to know where the center of that is. And this is not an accident. This isn't some oddness. This is the structural reality, because the sign system that we're producing in this requires boundaries. The sign system itself requires them, but those boundaries are placed retroactively on the flux. Okay? So we don't know where the fluctuations start or stop. We don't know how they're set up. But when we do name them, when we have a sign, we retroactively add them to this. There's a difference between it and one. This reads like Lacan. This is playing towards a lot of what Lacan played with. It isn't playing in the same way, though. It's coming in a very different direction. So the one sign that he names here, and he says is different. The exception is one sign in this code that always corresponds to highest or lowest. That's I. The subject, the I, the subject of your propositions. It always corresponds to the extremes of experienced intensities, the highest or lowest degree, right? And this is not accidental. Again, same thing. This is not set up like this is a crucial difference. This is not a middle point. The middle point is not where we find the subject. It's always in the upper or lower bounds of it. And so as such, because selfhood isn't this stable center, we can't find the center of it. We don't know where the edges are, but instead it's a function of those intensive peaks and troughs and valleys and waves. The thing that happens is when the waves crystallize and come together into this maximum or minimum threshold, the I becomes a subject, a logical subject, a grammatical subject of our propositions. And that phrasing is really specific here. This is Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. Our grammar and language seduces us into believing the I is a substrate of metaphysics. Nietzsche rallies against this grandly. Beyond Good and Evil, 1617. Nietzsche rallies against this, the seduction of the I and the way that we talk. But I is just a sign that arises when certain intensive thresholds are crossed, the highest or the lowest. And the reason at the highest or the lowest is the highest, the ecstatic, the creative frenzy of life, the orgasmic erotic, that thing. I am completely myself. I am one with everything. You are most, right? Highest, the big deal. You're peaking. Minimum intensity, where it's exhaustion or the like Thanatos, death drive kind of stuff, where you're just like, oh, and you're losing yourself. That either way, that recognition requires I as a reference point, and the extremes generate and build self-reference. The middle is possibly impersonal, but those edges of high and low push in the I pretty strongly, and it's where it's produced. And that sign, as he says, it is thanks to this sign, which nonetheless is nothing, but an always variable trace of a fluctuation. I love that phrasing. That we constitute ourselves as thinking, that a thought as such occurs to us, even though we are never quite sure if it is not others who are thinking and continue to think in us. So good. So the I, stating I, the I sign, right, allows us to appropriate emotions and thoughts and things. Oh, I'm telling you what I believe. A thought occurs to me, right? I'm appropriating thought as mine, right? That's my thought. I'm appropriating thought as mine. Following? But this appropriation itself is always uncertain. It's always uncertain because the thought actually might belong to others who continue to think in us, which is not really it's not stating again that someone else is directly thinking in us. It's not really talking about that, but more like the oddness of the way thought works, that despite this idea that it is ours, this thought is mine, a thought occurred to me, but that thought may not be mine. The I doesn't have a fixed content position. It is, at best, again, a metastable consistency itself. And so every time I is invoked, every time I say Brooks or myself or I'm here, I'm doing so in these different intensive states. And as such, that I means different things every fucking time I say it, or you say it, or any of us say it. And so when we talk about others who think in us... Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Sometimes clinicians like to use this word frame. I feel like maybe there's a little similarity here, but maybe it's because I've been reading Lacan too much. What do you think of this word frame? Or even just elements falling into different sets and then taken up by different sets? But that's a little bit too far, that taken up and falling off. But does this word frame ring any bell around this area when you're reading?
Yeah, I'm not able to fully understand you. Sorry, say it one more time. It's a little echoey. Sorry.
In the clinical literature side, people like to use this word frame when there's no fixed content, but still people are operating under this assumption. It's
right.
Like
say the word one more time for me.
Frame.
Frame. Frame.
Yes.
Frame. Okay.
Yes. Does this word ring any bell?
Yeah, no, I'm aware. I know. I understand framing. Yes.
Yeah. Just curious whether it connects to any other things. Maybe more from the structuralist side for you, or for other people.
So I think for here, I would probably say less. I mean, it's going to be a big deal as we get going because Klossowski's going to be bringing it in. But specifically here, the phrasing he's talking about is around the word I, the uniqueness of the ability for us to claim a thing as our own. And that's done through the intensities of the extremes. Either it's the most intense or the least intense. But as such, things in the middle, we tend not to claim directly as our own or feel the force of us being in that position as much, or experience the thing that demands we say I. We're able to sort of have a less focused on ourselves as a direct thing, that it's not about I at that point, but that we pop up as sort of those ends, because the I here is not about having fixed content. That's kind of the play, and there's a lot of plays he's making here. But when he says that, even though we're never quite sure if it's not others who are thinking and continue to think in us, he's not talking about other people. He's like other humans, he's talking about how you yourself are actually different people who think through yourself, and the I that is produced changes its state as well. So there's different I's across time that exist inside of any subjectivity or inside of anything. But it's across a lot, because Nietzsche, when he makes Nietzsche does the same thing in Beyond Good and Evil and plays with the idea of herd morality, where others are thinking in us. Then he talks about the psychological sort of drives of affects, the social structure of that, where others are thinking in us. And then we have others that we've kind of incorporated. And we can talk about I think kind of what you're talking about with framing or Freudian introjection, for example, or internal objects. These are interpersonal I's. But then there's also the ontological, which is, I think, where Klossowski's really pushing it, where it's like the singularities that traverse bodies, that it's not really an I in that sense, but that other I's that I have been are also thinking through me at this point. And Klossowski is staying ambiguous here, I think, intentionally, because as he gets through the rest of the section, he's going to start building out each one of these, because it's not really about recognizing at this point that selfhood is constitutively this uncertainty. It's not really that. We operate as if thoughts are ours. Structurally, we cannot own this thing, though. There is no way to secure ownership. And that's, I think that's what he's pushing for here mostly.
Okay, so from my perspective, it's a kind of like a combination of frames and coordinates, but that's a little bit even at the clinical side, that's kind of like an obscure way of seeing different things. A little bit Lacan, a little bit Melanie Klein side, but it's still obscure. But please
No,
continue. Thank you.
you're right. No, that's what the interpersonal, the Kleinian thing, very much as I read it.
Okay,
Too.
good, very good, very good. I'm gonna take a note here. Thank you.
Again, he's touching all of those. He does this a lot. There's an ambiguity he plays with intentionally. He writes more as a poet than like more traditional analytic philosopher, so it makes it a little tougher. Noah, tell me what the problem is with form here.
Well, when I read this here, where he says that signs permit us to signify something, it feels like this presumes a fixed form of a subject rather than the form of a subject being consistently produced, if that makes sense. Sort of like an empty box that constitutes a subject with content or experience fitting inside of that box, whereas I feel like Deleuze's transcendental empiricism or something would say that both the form and content of subjectivity is produced through intensity or different kinds of forces, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I guess I'm just like
give me two paragraphs. Give me two paragraphs and ask again, and we can talk about it. Because I totally understand what you're saying now. Gotcha. Give it a little bit. Let me see if anyone's saying anything on the YouTube, so I can just move on. Good. No one's talking on YouTube at all, which is wonderful. It's my favorite. All right. The previous page says, but what is this other that forms the outside in relation to this inside we believe ourselves to be? Everything is led back to a single discourse, namely to fluctuations of intensity that correspond to the thought of everyone and no one. So, the outside and inside relation, he's playing with some pretty complex philosophical topics, as he does, and he's making an argument for effectively a radical sort of immanence, that there is no transcendent other, that the inside-outside distinction is an appearance, but is not actually the thing. It's not actually what is. The inside and the outside resolve to discourse. The circuit of intensive flux that's happening here. So, yeah, that's how I'd phrase it, because he says everything is led back to a single discourse. Everything. And he's not being like simple with that word. He's being intentional as I read it. All of it. This is not linguistic discourse, but instead this underlying intensive process that produces the linguistic divisions, the single discourse. Spinoza's single substance, right, with infinite attributes. Tomorrow, if you want, by the way, you should join. Eldoran's going to be tearing apart my Spinoza video, which I'm looking forward to, about actually this very thing, because it's talking about that, but it's pulling Nietzschean force dynamics through it in a material way, and it says it again. Everything led back to discourse, namely fluctuations of intensity. That correspond to the thought of everyone and no one. It is universal and non-subjective. Universal and non-subjective. It is thoughtfulness, like pure thoughtfulness itself, that is like individuating into particular thoughts or particular thinkers. And it does that through this capture within the semiotic apparatus, right? So essentially, Klossowski through Nietzsche is dissolving in this paragraph inside and outside entirely, but not doing so by favoring one or the other. It's not alienation, the outside determines what's happening inside as that, or solipsism, where the inside's the only thing that matters as a whole. Instead, everything is a continuous, intensive surface that locally folds on itself into an interiority. Only locally, though. And that's that self, that I, the sign of the self that he's going to be going into here. And that's, I like the phrasing. So we're just going to dive in and keep going. The sign of the self in the code of everyday communication, insofar as it corresponds to the strongest or weakest intensity, and establishes a correspondence between our own degree of presence or absence of the outside, thus assures a variable state of coherence, both within ourselves and with our surroundings. The thought of no one, this intensity in itself without any determinable beginning or end, finds a necessity in the agent, the support, that appropriates itself for itself and is assigned a destiny within the vicissitudes of memory and the forgetting of itself or the world. Nothing could be more arbitrary, once we admit that everything is on a single circuit of intensity. For a designation to be produced, for a meaning to be constituted, my will must intervene. But again, this is nothing more than this appropriated intensity. That's just great. Man. Like, basically, he's also shitting on himself here. I don't know how I read this. I find Klossowski fascinating because he does these weird layers. So, because in the previous, he was talking about the inside-outside distinction, right? And the self and all of that. And he's like, but also, by the way, all of this shit I'm saying now is also an arbitrary imposition. It is useful, sure, but it's not like a privileged reality or ontologically privileged set of things. It is, as he's proposing through Nietzsche, it's almost a self-consuming philosophical stance. I don't know how else to read it except to say that. Because he opens up the sign of the self in the code of everyday communication, and so far as it corresponds, blah, blah, blah. The I is an operator of correspondence. Right? It's a particular word. This is if you're getting Lacan tingles, it's not far from that. Like, this is purloined letter shit, the correspondence, communication, all that. But it's like the internal states, the intensive internal flux has to find a way and correspond with external conditions. And this is what's there. The I is that. The subject is that operator of correspondence between, again, these states that are not ontologically accurate, but again, useful for us to talk about in this way. So we have a mapping almost that starts happening. We have intensities, and then world states, global world states. The self sign, I, basically allows us to navigate that social material reality. And it does so by stabilizing fluctuations, the flux, the intensities, into recognizable patterns that can be communicated at large with the everyday signs. Right? Yeah. And so he says, this phrasing is so great. It establishes a correspondence between our own degrees of presence or absence and the degrees of presence and absence with the outside. So you, the I, selfhood, right, subject, it operates itself on a spectrum. It's also not binary. It's not a strong or weak presence. It's polar, like magnetic poles or electrical poles. It's again in that space. And so there's this really interesting sort of thing where we talk about, like, strong presence would be high intensive coherence, which would give you a feeling of agency and identity. Strong presence, forceful presence. Hopefully you can understand what I'm saying, because this is kind of like a thing you might actually like. There are moments of life where you feel you exist more than any other moment. and you're feeling it there. This is the intensity of forces at play. The force of it feels agent. You feel agentic. You feel in control. You feel like you're doing stuff. You feel self-aware. You feel in the moment. You feel like you have really good situational awareness. Whatever it is, there are moments where you have those. And then you have other moments that are like a weaker presence, which is like a low decoherence, a dissociation, a depersonalization, not depression, different than that. It's just a really weak loss of self that sort of blends into the background. And again, you may not be even aware of it. It's not that, because if you were aware of it, it wouldn't be weak. But we experience all these fluctuations, and it's on a scale, but the I tracks the variation between those variable states of coherence. And that phrasing, the variable states of coherence, both within ourselves and within our surroundings, coherence, the ability for things to cohere, to have ongoing work between them, to be able to communicate. This is, I mean, again, this written in like late 1960s, like just jumping way ahead of where CogSci is these days. Like Metzinger's talking about CogSci stuff today, where coherence of the self requires ongoing work, it's achievement, not foundation, etc. This is just like way ahead of the curve on that. Also plays with CogSci differently, but it's like, this is the direction. It's this double correspondence. We have the internal that aligns a multiplicity of fluctuations into a felt unity. But then externally, there is with that a sort of self-sense of that with environmental affordances. And the hinge between these two domains is the I, is the subject playing around with that. Will moments of intense fear, anxiety be one of these moments of increased presence? Can be. Again, it's literally be thinking about the times you are more self-aware or not. I've been through horrifying traumas. You do not have self-awareness in the same way. It doesn't exist there. It doesn't mean that it's not an intense experience, but it's not the same thing. The affordance of the environment is incredibly strong. You feel nothing in comparison. You're kind of just going with the flow. A mosh pit is not drastically different than that, depending on how packed it is, versus moments where you are incredibly aware of yourself. You walk out on stage and you have stage fright, and you're going to be talking to people, and you're thinking over yourself so much that, again, intensities play out with the imminent experience of that thing that is between, the hinge between the external and the internal as a thing. How does this account for a group subject?
Well, like in the example you gave just now of how a self is able to have these experiences of like being more conscious of, themselves in certain situations, it just sounds like you're still prescribing the same self into those experiences, where it seems more so that it's not the same self being ascribed here, but it's erroneously producing the notion that there is the same you that has experienced those things. For example, if the subject is always being reborn, right, which is how D&G at least read this text, then it seems like you can't say that like there is a subject between two poles as much as there is a subject that's consistently
it's not that the subject is between two poles. I may have overstated if I said that. It is the self sign that is between the two poles. The I is the thing tracking the variation between the high intensive coherence and low intensive coherence, which is the external and internal sort of point. So it's not that you are the thing. It's that you saying you are the thing is the thing. Oh, fuck. That hurts my brain to say out loud.
But is this sign of the self fixed, though? Right? Because I feel like...
No.
Yeah, okay. See, that's kind of was a little bit of my confusion here.
No. The phrasing for him is the sign of the self in the code of everyday communication. That's what he's referring to very specifically in here, because he's talking about the gregarious grammar, the way things are communicated at large, the way that we necessarily are talking in order to discuss, and how that builds these things. An infant born doesn't understand the difference between itself and its mother. Very common. It's actually an amazing phenomenon for humanity, because they don't understand. They just know, oh, food, but it's mom's breast or the bottle, or mom is no different than their leg or their foot or their hand. They don't have a grasp of it the same way I would say I do, where I understand that my mom is a different person than me, and I learned that eventually. That setup of how I talk about myself and my interaction between it and the environment drastically changes, but the sign is the thing. The sign of self in the code of everyday communications, insofar as it corresponds to the strongest weak intensities, assures a variable state of coherence within ourselves and our surroundings. So you could just take the beginning and end and see what he's saying here. The sign of the self assures a variable state of coherence within ourselves and our surroundings. The sign enables that, and that coherence is the push, that coherence, that correspondence, because the sign is the correspondence, not the subject. The subject is maybe created in that moment, whatever it may be, but no, it's the I. When I say I, I'm cold. I am an operator of correspondence. I is an operator of correspondence. Does that make better sense, Noah? You're still saying the sign of the self is produced. Yes, but it's a unique sign of the self. The sign of the self is unique amongst all signs, because it does this, it has this function of being that fulcrum or that hinge that does stuff.
See, then I wonder if he's like falling into like a Lacanian trap of like a master signifier, for example. Like, what makes this, sign of the self different than any other sign? And is he kind of justifying the subject-object divide? Like to clarify, what I'm trying to say is, like, why prioritize a sign of the self in the first place instead of just like eradicate it?
Well, because it does exist.
I see. So is it like at the level of like social production for D&G? Like, is that how it, like? Yeah,
because Klossowski doesn't really have the same terminology, so I'm hesitant to sort of jump directly to that. So here's some differences with Lacan. The way Lacan sees the self is it's born out of lack. It's born out of a different thing. For Klossowski, it is not lack, but instead the plentitude of intensities, the excess, not far from like Bataille's version of that, that appropriates intensities for itself. But it is not necessarily sort of a determinate or pre-existing thing. It is, I'd probably phrase it to talk about it as like an element that, again, learned socially, learned at large, learned through gregarious herd mentality. Again, the code of everyday signs is really particular for him here, because it will take on different meanings depending on when it's said in the social situations. Just like D&G have different social registers from the primitive all the way through to capital, this would be the same. Like, it's not born identically. It's not like born at all. But this emergence of like where I find myself the most intensively existing, like all of the how to put it, all the waves that are producing all the things I experience, I can get lost in them, but there is a point where the force of them produces a moment of intensive extreme. And that threshold crossing that happens there doesn't actually have a retroactive meaning, but is registering a state currently. It's like if you see a tidal wave there, that moment, that thing. It's an I that is claimed in that moment. It's not a unified I or subject that carries between subjects.
Yeah, totally. I think that makes sense. I think like when you're talking about like an aggregate understanding of the self in terms of everyday communication, it does make sense. And I think maybe at the end of this paragraph, also, I'm not trying to grill you, Brooks. I think
No. This is stuff I want to talk about because this is the interesting shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think towards the end of it, for me, I think where it clicks too with what you just said is how he says my will is, again, nothing more than an appropriated intensity. So I think he is making an implicit distinction in a way of like a unified self versus a kind of self that's conceptualized as an appropriated intensity. So I think that I was kind of conflating the two here, but I think that at least clicks for me. So thank you.
Yeah, it's and again, Klossowski is in your, because what you're bringing up is like this contradiction inside of how he's talking about things, because it is this odd way that both seem to be the structural position, right? Lacan's master signifier is a structural position that produces the rest of the meaning structure. The self sign seems like it's playing that same thing, but it's not. It's registering intensive states that already exist, pre-existing at that point. So if we were to say like a thermometer, for example, registers temperature, but it doesn't produce heat. The self sign is that indexical. It isn't a symbolic arbitrary representation. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I think it's clicking for me now. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's, and again, we get into the problem of like literally we're talking about signs and using signs to talk about what exceeds sign systems. So that's fun. Like, yeah, and this is why he keeps using these language like he did in the previous paragraph. Like I said, it's like a self-consuming philosophy. That's Klossowski's entire setup, is to drive towards this. He believes that ultimately you cannot like go pre-semiotic with semiotics. Like you can only gesture at these things and speak towards it in a way that self-consumes. So, yeah. I would also add the other big deal for Lacan, that master signifier, is that you have one. Like I said, you have the God, the king, the father, the capital, whatever it is. But the self sign is, there isn't one. There's no unifying meta I. There's just the I's that are continually being produced by this. So if you think of this version of it, the self sign is being produced only at these points of high or low. And so if you have these ebbs and flows and it's incredibly complex and you have all of them, it produces the moment where you, oh, I'm feeling this way, or I'm doing this, or I'm that. But then in the next moment, it's gone again. It's a produced element, not something that sort of is determinate. At some point, we're going to be talking about the way that that every drive has its own organizing principle. It's in this text because he's going to be talking about the will to truth, which he did a bit, the will to power, like all of Nietzsche's wills. And he's going to be talking about how each one sort of has its own governing and organizing principles, which is going to be a very polytheistic, odd way to sort of understand this. But again, all of these don't even unify into a single sovereignty at any point. The I is produced contingently and disappears again, over and 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 over. And then the reason we're able to talk about it, because this is, again, this is the sign. This is not the simulacra. This is the sign produced. There's a particular order to things for Klossowski, where the intensivities colliding, and then they have that sort of odd self-referential moment, produces a sign. Then we have signification, and then we have communication, which is what we're doing, where we're talking about the I. This is simulacra for him. This is us utilizing the terms to talk about the things that were experienced imminently. But it's not the thing. Fuck. Fuck, it's a lot. The big thing during this first part, and I'm going to keep going, because the I sign, this thing that pops up, that is produced in these moments and then fades away. It's, again, all of these signs are produced by these intensivities. We are not talking about those right now. We are talking in like a third way about them. And we'll get to that, but right now we're just talking about the immediate produced thought of I that you have. Not saying I, not us talking about I, not the abstract quality of I. We're talking about just the experience where I pops up. Okay? He says, the thought of no one, this intensity in itself, without any determinable beginning or end, finds a necessity in the suppote, the agent, that appropriates it for itself and is assigned a destiny within the vicissitudes of memory and the forgetting of itself or the world. This is actually mostly responding to what you're talking about, Noah. It doesn't sound like it. We'll get through it. This is kind of that same point. The thought of no one. The thought of no one. The intensity in itself, without any determinable beginning ends, finds a necessity in the support. The support. Intensity requires appropriation to be determinate, to become actual, to become something. Without the I as an organizing principle, the flux remains chaotic potential only. So the subject isn't really an illusion, not in like the way that we would talk about, like I conjure an illusion and it's gone. It's necessary for actualization. Intensity needs a support, an agent, to manifest as this thought or that thought or another thought. The thought of no one, the intensity in itself. And so instead of the traditional idealist, I think, therefore blank, I am, or whatever, it's instead, I am requires I think in order to become actual in itself. So like the subject is effect that becomes the condition for the realization of intensity. I think. Yeah, I like that. I like that last sentence I said. The subject, fuck, I lost it. That's okay. That's how I would say it. The subject is the effect and becomes the condition for the realization of intensity. And there's a really interesting phrasing, assigned a destiny, which I like. Appropriates it for itself and is assigned a destiny. This is super Deleuze. This is super Deleuze. Destiny versus necessity. This is super logic sense. There's a temporal dimension to this. Again, this doesn't exist just in the now and then. The minute you've named it, you've already moved on. Yes, the path that you can walk is not the path. The name that you can name is not the name. Correct. Yes. When we talk about it being assigned to destiny, there is a temporality to all of this that matters. Things don't just disappear. Their traces exist in time. Memories exist in time, like all of these terms that all these thinkers used. And here, assigned a destiny is the temporality of it. Through this appropriation, there is this impersonal intensity that enters history. It's remembered or forgotten or narrated or corresponded with, transmitted to someone else, whatever it may be. The subject is the temporal coherence. It provides the temporal coherence. Provides, it isn't actually that, but it's providing it. The I is providing that coherence. It makes intensity available for us to talk about and remember and forget. Otherwise, it would vanish in the moment. So Noah, if you're wary of the high-low intensity push, think of it as do not think of it as there being a transcendent I, but instead that all the forces that are existing, that exist everywhere, all of them are colliding and raising high and going low. There's tidal waves and small waves and eddies and whatever it may be, riptides, all that fun shit. All of it's going. And all the forces that are pushing together to make you have extreme versions as well. It's not all the time. It's actually not super common. The moments where you feel most you, or that you exist the most, are the most of that or the least of that. Where you are aware of the absence of the intensities or aware of the highest of the intensities. It is in that moment, okay, that the sign of I comes to exist. That sign of I, in the everyday signs, gives a coherence between your highest and lowest, because again, it's in relation to the external as well. It's all at once. The things through you producing all of it. In that moment, you become more aware of the acute difference between the vibrations of things, the tonality of things, the impulses of things, become more aware of their self. And then they blend back into the thing when it's no longer focused on that. But that in that moment, there's an awareness of self. It just like awareness of tree when the sun hits it in a certain way. There's forces at play that bring things to the forefront or the back. This ties in with Ruyere. This is super Ruyere. I
just feel like this is still sort of like centering a human subject, at least, because like when we're talking about,
I'm literally describing how it's not, though.
But I feel like it still is in the sense of like when you're defining yourself, you define yourself via particular high, low intensity. So it's like for me as a person, I might define myself.
Nope. We haven't gotten to defining yourself.
But is the definition not of the subject here, or the sign of the self?
We aren't.
A question of like.
We're not at the point where we're able to talk about ourselves yet. This is the experience of self-awareness.
But doesn't self-awareness preclude the notion of a self? Like it's in the term, right? Like I feel like
have you ever been in the zone, like where you're just have the most Say what?
I'm in the zone right now.
No, there you go. You're in a high tonality moment, right? You are aware of your own actions in a weird way, an unusual way. You might be teaching.
But is it me that's aware of anything, or is it eyes that are seeing things? Is it a body connected to the earth?
We're not having that discussion yet.
But you're still saying that there's a you, like you are aware.
No, we're not. In the same way that we wouldn't talk about a tidal wave, but we would say there is a tidal wave. Would you not say there's a tidal wave when you see a tidal wave? Of course you would. And when the tide suddenly goes way out right before the tidal wave, you'd go, wow, that's fucking weird. That went way out. It doesn't mean that the ocean is a tidal wave. It doesn't mean that it is the draining of the ocean. But it's in that moment, it's like noticing those moments, those high tonalities, the extreme versions of each of those. Because this is what he's driving at. That the forces that are working through us produce high and low. That you as let's talk about you, not you as a thoughtful person, but just as a collection of sensory apparatus, organs, and a subject. I don't give a fuck. There are moments where you are far more self-aware, or where you're dissipating and you're aware of yourself dissipating. These things exist. And these are the moments at the edges of what that might be, the edges of what might produce you. But we're not at the point of thinking, oh, I exist. It's not quite the same thing. What we're talking about is there are those moments of extreme intensity that, let's talk about it as a baby or a child, that You become more aware of your laughter. But is it your laughter? Why is it? Well, it's the intensities of it, high or low, or where you fade into the background. But it's so pronounced that you disappear. You become more knowing that people are alienating you, or that you're not part of the environment, or that you don't have control, whatever that is. You become more aware at the end points. But when everything else is kind of going, there's no self that's meaningfully experienced. And that's what he's talking about. That is the production of the I, the intensities that are producing signs, and how the sign I comes about. He's not talking about there becoming a substantial subject, just that because there is a collection of apparatus and organs that I am a thing, and there are high tonalities and low tonalities. I experience emotional, detriment and not. I disappear into conversations. Other times I'm absolutely aware of myself. Earlier in this fucking stream, I went through this as you got to watch me try to, and then become aware I was being dumb fuck and couldn't really get my words together. And then I just couldn't really find myself in it. And I've become frustrated. Like these things that produce the edges of the experience that are being collected into a consistency. We're not in consistency yet, but those edges are where the I sign is created.
I think the last bit of what you said is helping me get closer about how like it maybe defines like the contours of a subject at least, but like even then I still and I'm not trying to be facetious here, but like with D&G, right, or when we look at like the interconnectedness of everything, it's kind of like weird to me that we can kind of even say that the subject, or not even that anything can be relegated to a set of organs, like when those organs are connected to the earth to the cosmos and so on, right? So it's like, I guess it's just hard for me, like why are we drawing a particular contour around the body or the organs?
No, I don't remember saying any of that.
But you're talking about like a you that was like stammering earlier or something like that, but like
sure.
That you is not your body, right? It's like there's more to it than that, because your body is connected to everything.
The body is irrelevant. It's the environment and the forces colliding, and that's the production of the I in the high tonality and low tonality. The machinery that all of these pieces are, and that includes the microphone, that includes my screen that I'm looking at, includes you, it includes the sounds in my ears, the pressure of the room, the fact that my dog wouldn't stop barking, all of this stuff, all the forces are, for me, and I'm Brooks, for Brooks, they're all colliding in very particular ways, and they are at the extremes of where I understand or that are producing the sort of edges of experience. The thing that's happening there is those intensities being produced are drawing the edges. The foam in where the ocean crashes into the walls doesn't have to produce sea foam. It really doesn't, by the way. There's a lot of places where it's weird and it's kind of clear. Other places very much produce sea foam. These things and how these things come together are what produce thoughts. And so thoughts being the sign produced of these collisions, of these intensities, of these things and what they're being left behind, seems to me to be the point, because it's dissolving the idea of inside, outside, or the centered subject. But it's not dissolving the idea that there is, in some capacity, an edge of experience for me. Just in the same way that like my eyes and how I'm able to understand or read the screen, and I can become self-aware of my eyes as I focus and concentrate or whatever it is, it's not like they're your eyes. That would become nonsense at that point. There are still edges to all of the forces that are producing me. And this is where I would argue this is D&G. This isn't drastically different. The traces are being written on the BWO, but it's the traces and intensities of the experience of that collectivity, of that multiplicity. It's not everything. So there still is some level of decentered sort of creation, but it's all of those intensities are still writing on the BWO, and it's not a global BWO. It's a BWO, right?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think
and so then you have extreme intensities that are like, Go ahead.
With Deleuze's sort of view of empiricism, like his critique is that you can't just take a given tidal wave. Like we have to understand the intensities and what causes the production of the tidal wave. So I guess maybe some of where my confusion lies is how can we even fully call it a tidal wave if like, is that something arbitrary to call it, you know, because
we have to call it something. And because we use, for Klossowski, it's because of the words that we use every day, the code of everyday signs.
I get it. Yeah, I think I'm getting a little too like caught up in like maybe the connectivity instead of like subjects that are produced.
Yeah, it's a bit different. So see, DNG and AO go very deep into like a process. But the thing to remember, and it's why I really like Klossowski's reading, and I'm trying to figure out how to find ways to really help them come together. But for Klossowski's reading, he's doing away with process, where it's step 1, step 2, step 3. Because DNG also do this. DNG are not fans of step 1, step 2, step 3. For them, the process is imminent. It happens effectively all at once. There's an order to it of sorts, but there isn't like this happens, then you check off a box, and then the next thing. It's these things happen constantly as the impulse is driving. And Klossowski, I think, makes that case very well, that it's an all at once, that it's the constancy of the multiplicity of forces are constantly going around, and where they culminate, and they do, just like they do in just like the old joke goes, like, there's no bookshelf there. The bookshelf is actually a series of waves and particle interactions in particular waves that have culminated in a hardness of repulsion that are pushing, like, we have some level of understanding, but that there's no bookshelf. It's just, again, the same thing, but there is, in the sense that I can't push on it. If I were to hit you with a fucking axe, it doesn't matter that there's no axe. You're still dead. There's like, these things still happen. They still have these culminations in these particularities. How do we get to that? And how do we find the words for that? And how do we come to that? That's more the question for this. And that's like the signs of the self in the code of everyday communication, just to bring it right back to the text, because we're right in that place. It's perfect, actually. It might be perfect. The sign of the self in the code of everyday information, insofar as it corresponds to the strongest or weakest intensity. This is the phrasing he's going for. But it's a really different setup. It's the thought of no one, blah, 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 all that. Assigned a destiny within the vicissitudes of memory and the forgetting of itself and the world. You don't remember the intensities that produced your understanding of yourself, or that produced the edges of I, or the signs that we then attach the simulacra of those words to. These things that are produced, the thoughts that are produced, disappear. They go away. Forgetting everything is kind of it. The subject forgets its own intensive origins. That's like the nature of the alienation, and Nietzsche talks about this. But it also forgets about like external conditioning, because it's narcissistic at a basic level. It's a narcissistic play. It's a self-referential narcissistic thing. But he ends with, and this is the nothing could be more arbitrary once we admit everything is on a single circuit of intensity. And he doesn't mean everything lightly, Noah. Everything is on a single circuit of intensity. If it's all,
like, I think for me, like, that's just what I was trying to say, and of course he said it here. But yeah, that's just what I was trying to get at. So I promise. I promise.
No. I trust me. I love it. If you're thinking it, someone else listening is doing the same, and it's worth going over, because that's like the point. If everything is this intensive continuum, this chaosmosis, then any cut, any designation, any actual thing is actually not motivated by the process. That's not how it's set up. Signification, which is the end of the situation, requires arbitrary imposition of boundaries. Arbitrary. It's nothing can be more arbitrary, but it's not randomly arbitrary. It's necessity without reason, or sufficient reason, you might say. It's what he was talking about with destiny a moment ago. Signs and signifiers and communication has to be produced for communication and survival. That's Nietzsche's thing. We think the way that we do and we talk the way that we do because we survived. Like, that's it. If we didn't do this, maybe we wouldn't have, and maybe there were people who didn't, and that's the way that goes, because this process that kept us here, that kept us alive, this thing is being produced sort of for this at this point. But there is no sign system grounded in the intensivity and the real. So language is a convention, but it's also unavoidable, which is fucked up. For a designation to be produced, for meaning to be constituted, my will must intervene. But again, this is nothing more than this appropriated intensity. My will must intervene. But again, he immediately says, my will must intervene, but this is nothing more than appropriated intensity, which he just stated is like not ground up. It's not chosen. It's arbitrary. So what the fuck is he talking about here? Well, it's that will is not this autonomous faculty. Like, it is the intensive threshold reaching self-awareness. This is the moment. Genealogy 2, right, opens with the idea that will is a retrospective reinterpretation, a post hoc justification of affects. It is not a causal origin. And if that's the case, we need to, this is not, so again, there's a lot of ways to take Nietzsche. You could do the essential salts thing or the reactionary thing and be like, oh, if all of it is just us reaching like self-awareness and it's not chosen, then there's that. But wait, we're aware of that and we actually are able to talk about it and communicate that. So even though it's retrospective interpretation of affects and not causal origin, that doesn't mean it doesn't affect us. Because when I talk about this, it still produced enough affect and intensity in you to do different things. So now we're in a fucked up place. But again, even the stuff I'm saying is still this single circuit. All distinctions, all actual things are simple, localized variations inside of this great chaosmatic, intensive flux. Right? The same way we would talk about the potential differences in electrical conductivity. That's not, oh, that thing is electrically conductive in a vacuum. It's like, no, even that vacuum is sort of part of this same larger fucking electrical system. This is, to me, Noah, this is where we start seeing the BWO. The ATP version, by the way, because this is the intensive continuum that exists prior to being organized. So, yes, this paragraph is weird, and it's Klossowski doing his thing again, because he's kind of performing and writing the argument as he's making it. He's saying, hey, here are a bunch of distinctions I'm going to talk about. Inside, outside, interior, exterior, intensity, sign, I, other. But these things are ultimately arbitrary impositions that are useful, but they're not privileged. He's creating his own self-consuming philosophy in and of itself as he goes. So, yeah. Phew. Did that help, Noah? Did we get through a thing that actually touched into anything you were talking about there at all? Please. No, maybe. All right. Oh, Noah stepped away. Which, if I understand, Elderon is also Geralt Spinoza. It's not far from Geralt Spinoza. It's going to be fun tomorrow. I'm looking forward to Elderon tearing apart my Spinoza take. Because I did it from a very special position, but Elderon's been spending a lot more time with better authors than me, so I'm looking forward to it. I wish Noah didn't go away, because this next bit is kind of like the big one, and it's a very short little bit, because we're talking about the Stimmung, the high tonality of the soul, right? This is what we've been coming back to over and over and over. For Nietzsche's high tonality, where the eternal return came back, where he became exceptionally aware of himself, and that he will be losing that as he dives back in. This is the thing. This is the high mood, the manic, right? All of this is pushing back. So he says, Klossowski writes, Stimmung. Now in a Stimmung, in a tonality that I will designate as the highest feeling, that I will aspire to maintain as the highest thought, what has happened? Have I not surpassed my own limits and thereby depreciated the everyday code of signs, either because thought abandons me or else because I can no longer discern the difference between fluctuations from without and those from within? The mood, Stimmung, the tonality, atmosphere, whatever. There's a bunch of ways to do this. This is one of the real low points of English. This is a good word, good German word that I wish we had stolen so we could have a word for it. But it's this Stimmung, this high tonality, this highest feeling. This is not a highest thought. It's all of it. It is this bolt of lightning moment for Nietzsche. And in this moment that I will designate the highest feeling, I will aspire to maintain as the highest thought, what has happened? Have I not surpassed my own limits and thereby depreciated the everyday code of signs, either because thought abandons me or else because I can no longer discern the difference between fluctuations without and those from within? This is the fundamental question of the moment of, the high tonality. Is it that nothing else matters? That he's found himself, this hyper ego? Or is it that he's lost himself and become the world? He's lost the world and become himself? Or for Klossowski, because I can no longer discern the difference between fluctuations from without and those from within. This is, God damn it, Noah, you motherfucker. Now you had to leave. Because Noah's having an issue with talking about, hey, we've got on the one side this stable ego, and then we've got the world. This feels weird to do it. And that's kind of Klossowski's final point, is that this Stimmung, this highest point, this moment, is it that you're actually finding yourself there and forgetting the world? Or you're finding the world, forgetting yourself, which is the sort of Buddhist enlightenment version? Or is it because you're losing the difference between them? That you can't discern the difference between the fluctuations externally and internally, that you simply are there in those fluctuations. So he says, the answer is that, by the way, that last bit. These are a few real short paragraphs. I'm just going to kind of bust through them a little bit. Up to now, in the everyday context, everyday, code of everyday signs, everyday context, thought was always referred back to me in the designation myself. But what becomes of my own coherence at that degree of intensity where thought ceases to refer back to me in the designation myself and instead invents a sign by which it would designate its own coherence with itself? If this sign is no longer my own thought, does it not signify my exclusion from all possible coherence? If it is still mine, how could it conceivably designate an absence of intensity at the highest degree of intensity? Now Noah's argument. God damn it, Noah. What is such last line? What did I miss? Sorry. Oh, it's a Crest of the Dead. Ignore that. It's stupid fucking artifact of OCR scanning. There's no good scans of this. This is the best I got. So ignore the apostrophe in the next sentence. Okay. This is like the crux of like so fucking much of this section. Okay. In everyday context, thoughts happen. Right? You think. I don't think I have a lot of Republicans here. So we know you think. Your thoughts are attributed to you. Or I'll talk for myself. My thoughts get attributed to me. Myself. And this attribution maintains my own coherence. The word I, myself, whatever, I functions as this like gravitational center pulling things into orbit around itself, maintaining that, right? At peak intensity, at Stimmung, right? Thought still happens. Of course it fucking does. But it doesn't really refer to me. I don't feel it the same way. It's not my thought. Thought achieves instead a coherence with itself, almost like the thought is self-organizing. And so thought invents a new sign to designate this self-coherence. Okay? Instead of thinking that thought disappears at the peaks, which is like traditional misunderstanding, I would say, of like Eastern mysticism, but also, in Western Enlightenment thinking or whatever, that you disappear or thought disappears. It's not that. Actually, thought becomes exceptionally coherent in these moments. But it's a non-subjective coherence. It's not that it's incoherent rambling. It's a hyper-coherence, an organization of itself that excludes I from its operations because it doesn't need the I. The coherence of the thought is so significant, it doesn't need I to maintain this. So Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil, 17. A thought comes when it wishes, not when I wish, so that it is a falsification of the facts to say, the subject I is the condition of the predicate think. It thinks, but that this it is precisely that famous old I is, to put it mildly, only an assumption. That's Nietzsche. But Klossowski's taking that and saying, wait. Nietzsche's still saying it thinks as this impersonal constant. Klossowski's actually going further and taking Nietzsche further than Nietzsche, as these guys do. The idea being that thoughts at peak intensity have its own signs of organization. It is not simply an absence of I, but positive alternative structures that are being created. So what you might say, for example, is, artistic creation, where we have novel forms of the new that are self-contained, philosophical inventions, new concepts that are created, scientific discoveries that are themselves building their own abstract, self-organized thing that don't necessitate an I or even a scientist to be part of it. It just is the thing. Private codes as a thing, neologisms, the way people can sort of speak nonsense but make sense to each other. There's a lot of shit that happens here because each of these is involving like the generation of signs adequate to an intensive coherence, not adequate to a pre-existing sign of everyday codes of everyday signs. And that's the phrasing he says in here that's really, really important. Noah. Because this is the deal. Thought invents a sign. It's the phrasing he uses. It's not that signs disappear, right? That's not it. Different signs emerge. This is such a different semiotics than anything we were talking about. It's so very different. pink intensity has its own semiotic regime. So would the lowest. So would middle ground, all of that. The everyday signs come in. That's great. But all of these things that are playing have different emergence of signs. And these things are incommensurable with the signs of everyday code or code of everyday signs. Completely different setup. And then he asked the questions. If this sign is no longer my own thought, does it not nignify my exclusion from coherence? It's a important question. And this is Zizek talked about this. It's got one of my favorite lines on happiness, where when you're in those moments of creative fervor and you've lost yourself, the pain or suffering or happiness doesn't even enter into it. We want those moments. We don't want happiness. Happiness is this conformist bullshit category. I've always loved that, because if you've ever been able to have, and I hope you have, these moments of creative indulgence that you disappear inside of, it's not really that you disappear. That's not the thing. You just become such a part of all of these things. And the question, if a sign is no longer my own thought, does it not signify my exclusion? It's a great paranoiac reaction almost to it, because I'm losing ownership of my mental life at that point. I don't have an organizing principle at large. It's incoherent in terms of everyday signs. I'm excluded from meaning itself. You could say I'm experiencing the skiz. For those of you part of our AO reading. So, to reach truly novel creation, Organelles asked, can only be reached through and beyond the I. Does that limit first the established and then crossed, or is it hindrance along the way? I don't even know if I would go as far as to say it can only be reached through and beyond the I. The intensive moments, it's irrelevant at that point. It's not even the conversation, because the register that it operates on doesn't have that same meaning or semiotic structure. You can still have the word I inside of these things, but it doesn't represent the same thing as it does in everyday signs. Again, how I'm reading this. Because he asked the question, if it's still mine, how could it conceivably designate an absence of intensity at the highest degree of it? It says the new sign is still mine, right? Right? I would need a sign that designates my own absence at this point, because I is the intensity at the extremes, but it's disappearing as the forces have reached peak coherence. Again, this is a subjectivity that is wholly produced. And so as such, when, let's say, the forces and everything that are part of your environment and you are no longer incommensurate, when you are just in that thing with the world around you and you're just going with it, this high intensity, everything's feeding back into positive loops, that thing, this highest degree, maximal coherence or self-coherence, this hyper-coherence with itself, the intensities, not coherence with me. That's the thing. It's not saying I don't exist, because you couldn't say I don't exist in these moments. The designator and designatees shift. The content of the designation almost negates there being a designator. Yeah. Intensity is present. I, as the code of everyday signs, is simply absent from it. Doesn't mean that you're not there, that you're not involved, that you're not doing stuff, but it doesn't register the same. It doesn't work the same. You're not, like, you wouldn't say you're watching from the outside. That's not really the setup. These things play differently. Like, there's a lot of times where we talk about impersonal intensities as being ours. We appropriate other people's feelings. We project other people's feelings into ourselves, or vice versa, whatever it may be. Like, that's the thing. At peaks, all of those false appropriations disappear. The underlying structure of the intensities and what they're producing show up. This is You could say, if there's a traditional like Buddhist version, it's anatta, the non-self, not the not self, but the non-self. That there is no actual permanent self that witnesses experiences, that that only occurs in events that we attribute to the I. This is a materialist take on that. This is not looking at liberation, but instead an accuracy and understanding, which shifts all of that sort of as a thing. Yeah, that's probably how I'd phrase it. Organelle says, the I is certainly dissolved in that experience, but I was wondering if it ever had to be there in the first place. Ever had to be there. No. It's not a tautological certainty that the word I is there, but more what it's talking about, again, as I understand it, is the way that the intensities, because think of a baby and in a room of rocks. The ability for that baby to be producing or doing things, the muscles contracting, noises being made, heat being given off, being taken in, all those things, versus the rocks. The intensities of all of the different, energetic elements of that space, they're concentrated in the baby. They're not in the rocks. The rocks have their own. There's still stuff there, but it's not the same setup. The baby would come to learn the edges of experience that are the highs and lows, the I'm not here, I am there, and it can feel itself again. It begins to develop the traces that begin building itself, the edges of where I am or I am not. It doesn't maybe have the word I, but it's able to understand subjectivity and the edges of its body, what it can affect, what it can't affect. It doesn't think it's a fucking force-wielding Jedi by being able to go tree, uproot itself. Like, that's not its setup. So it exists as all of these intensities that have over time created the traces that create the edges. In time, we begin calling ourselves or understanding ourselves as this thing. That connecting in with the ability to communicate. I will do this. You will do that. Steve will do this. Organelles will write this. Noah will type that. This combined community thing that happens there. This is the everyday signs. There are experiences we have where we disappear into our work, into things that are happening. It doesn't mean that we don't have edges. It just means we have a different way of interacting, that the forces and the impulses and everything that are coalescing through us don't have those edges in the same way. That the ideas and the forces themselves sort of get to experience as the edges themselves. You may not ever use the word I. It may be any other word. It may be just an understanding of self. But there is an everyday sign of self. I will go hunt. I will go do this, because there has to be in order to survive. One man can't live on his own. It doesn't work that way. So over time, you develop these signs. And again, this is touching into Godelier's sort of rebuilding of Strauss as well. But the intensities as being the thing that grounds this. And people finding the edges of themselves, edges of those intensities where I am not or where I am. And everything else is kind of in this blur mold because it's not really relevant to the I or the not. So it doesn't produce those structures. It doesn't produce the eliciting of those signs. But then when we're lost in it, whether it's a fervor, a passion, finding ourselves in all of this, when you have these moments, it's not that you disappear. It's that the ideas have their own coherence and you lose yourself in them, not because you lose yourself, but because I don't exist in that way. It's on a different register entirely. And that's kind of the next thing he says. And I kind of want to get to that. Where do I end and where does not I begin? It's not far from the point, but there is I can't reach outside of the wall here. I can't hug you it's not possible. I cannot hug you right now. There is something there. There's some level of, like, this is the edges of the intensities that are producing my meaning of my understanding through myself, that then falls back on itself and then creates it. Then these traces of what my limitations are, or what I felt, where I felt the edges of myself, produce the consistency that I have through time. But that high tonality moment, this is the driver. Like, this is absolutely the driver for this, because we're talking about how did the eternal return come about? What is it and how is it put together? That's this, I think, this next bit we're going to be going through. And I want to get to that paragraph. Any questions? Is this making more sense or less sense as I go? Because it'd be easy for me to fuck it up. The ideas have their own coherence. Yeah, it works on their own register. Because again, the ideas don't exist. All of this is arbitrary. All the ways we're talking about this are arbitrary. Everything is these impulses that are receding, acceding, suffluxing, affluxing, refluxing, running into each other, producing peaks and valleys and noise and middling. Who gives a fuck? Like zero intensity, but not good, not intensity zero, like some intensity, brown noise, that kind of shit. But then things happen, and I start to recognize as I move my hand, I get burned. Well, I felt that. I felt that excessive intensity. I got burned. Did you get fucking burned? You didn't get fucking burned. I got fucking burned. Now there's an edge to me, sort of. But then when I'm actually cooking, even if I burn myself, like, you have those moments of creative beauty, you disappear in it. Then what? Is there no you? Well, you're still there. It's got its own consistency that works differently. And that's where we're going, because that's the next bit. It's making both more or less sense. I appreciate that, Christ of the Dead. It's first thing in the morning for me. That is a fair statement. Flow state. Yes, 92. Flow state is a thing they've done studies on. As a gamer, gamers talk about this, getting in the zone where you and the game become one. You do. Now, you're still only that character in the game, or that vehicle, or that gun, or whatever it is. And you're still you, but the meaning of I disappears. That it shifts what it means. It gains its own signs. Absolutely spot on. So we disappear and then eternally return ourselves. Don't skip ahead, Crest of the Dead. Don't skip ahead. But yes, that's basically, we eternally return to understand this and then disappear again. Yes. And then we forget. Because if all we could ever remember was this, like, we have to forget it. And then we go back to everyday life, and then we come back, and over and over. You will do it again. It will happen again, and it has happened again. Now let us suppose that during such a high tonality, a moment of excessive passion and a lightning strike from the world, during such a high tonality of the soul, an image of the circle is formed. Something happens to my thought in this sign. It regards itself as dead, no longer my own. My thought enters into such a strict coherence with it that the invention of this sign of the circle takes on the power of all thought. Does this mean that the thinking subject would lose its own identity in a coherent thought that would itself exclude identity? There's nothing here to distinguish the designating intensity from the designated intensity. To reestablish the coherence between the self and the world is constituted by everyday designations. A single circuit brings me back to the code of everyday signs and then makes me depart, again leaving me at the mercy of the sign as soon as I try to explain to myself the event it represents. That's it. This is the moment of the eternal return. Let us now suppose that during such an image, a high tonality of soul, an image of the circle is formed. Something happens to my thoughts in this sign. It regards itself as dead, no longer my own. This is the concretized instance, not abstract theory of this event. The circle. Circle's capitalized because we're talking about a definitive element, right? This is what happened at Silmarie. This is 6,000 feet beyond man and time, the thought of the eternal recurrence. The circle, the loop. Image is formed. Not I formed an image, not Nietzsche formed an image, but an image formed itself during this tonality. The subject is the site, not the agent of the formation. If you ever wanted to understand what they meant when they said how to make yourself a body without organs, the subject as site, not agent of the formation. This is inverting the very idea of the subject that we have. Hold on, right? The image of the circle constitutes itself through the subject. Right? The subject is not constituting an image. Something happens to my thought in this sign. The sign is acting on thought. Something happens to my thought in the sign. In the sign, in the subject, through the subject, something happens to my thought as a subject. This is a whole different thing. The sign is now an autonomous agent. It exists outside of me. It's not me. I don't even necessarily exist here. The thought itself is achieving autonomy through the death of the subject. This is not a loss in and of the sense, but like the death of God kind of thing for Nietzsche. This is not a loss of thought. This is not madness. This is not schizophrenia. This is the schiz. This is a hyper-coherent, self-coherent thought that excludes the living subject, even though it includes all of the intensities that produce that subject. Yes, the subject as site, as location, as foundation, as grounding of the thought. That's how I read this, yes. That's how I read this. Freud had the death drive, which wasn't really a desire for annihilation, but compulsion towards a unnatural stability. This kind of plays through that because this perfect coherence is that kind of death of the alive subject. Because if the subject changes, the constellation of forces would change too. Have you ever had a brilliant thought and then the next day tried to remember it and you couldn't quite get there again or fully understand what you were thinking? That's because the subject that created it died to make it. And that substrate of that dead subject, of all of the parts of what you were in that moment, they don't come back again because it was a unique configuration of those things. The death of the living becoming substrate, becoming the ground that the coherence can be formed from, is disturbed when that subject shifts again. Wholly different. The death of the author, people talk about it, and I've even used it more the colloquial sense, like, oh, we just can't care about the author. No, when Blanchot talks about death of the author, it is that artwork requires the author to be dead because the art needs to be autonomous. Deleuze takes this, I think, in a much more interesting direction where it's very much still death of the painter, but plays slightly differently because this is not a metaphorical death, which is what Blanchot was going for. But instead, this is the phenomenological experience of oneself as dead, but still thinking. Right? Right? That's fucking crazy. I fucking love this. I love this book so fucking much. God damn it. Because that's the... When you don't disappear, you become the substrate for thought to have itself. You become a vehicle for that. Oh. All right, sorry. I'll continue. I really love Klossowski. It's just a stunningly simple way of stating some very complicated things. He says, my own thought enters into such a strict coherence with it that the invention of the sign, the circle, takes on the power of all thought. Now, strict coherence here means a huge amount. This is not an odd unity, but this is a rigorous ontological connection, like a connection of necessity, right? It's not optional associations as things. This is a deeply logical or ontological process. Deleuze goes into this in logic sense, actually, I think pretty well, because this is the thing. When we talk about thought's coherence with itself, there is an internal necessity independent of the will of the subject. This is so important to understand, I would argue, to understand Deleuze in general, when he talks about philosophy creating concepts and there being an internal necessity that is independent of anyone's will, but he includes the author, like Deleuze's idea of the body without organs, the Cartesian cogito, Kant's rational faculties. Like, what we're doing is we're adding in that body, that person, as the substrate within which that ontological logic can grow into the rest of that thing. Thought is able to think itself, and it takes on the power of all thought. The circle here becomes the total horizon. There is no territoriality here. This is not one thought in the sea of others here, right here, and it's only this one. This is where thought becomes the organizing principle of all thought, right? So the eternal return as the highest thought is not some minor content fun claim, but it is the very conditions of possibility itself for thinking at all. Nathan says, can you explain that again? Sorry, I got lost a bit. Which part, Nathan? Just type it out. I'll do my best. Because I could compare this. So, for example, for Kant, right, the categories of things, the causality, the substance, whatever, these categories enable experience to be possible. We can't think about the world without them for Kant. But those categories are universal structures of the subjective, right? The circular here, Nietzsche's circle through Klossowski here, is actually a singular contingent event that has universal organizing power for this thinker here. Not all thinkers, but for this thinker here. I'm using very particular wording there. It's not easy. This is like super hard to use signifiers that I'm not going to fucking ruin this book for people. But that's the thing. Because like the eternal return doesn't organize thought for everybody. That wouldn't make any sense. This intensive process itself exists for people whose intensive constitution permits it. Nietzsche's pathos of distance, for example, the way that he talked about the aristocratic versus the herd types, that they differ in which thoughts can even deal with them. Right? this thinker, Klossowski, or perhaps you, I have no idea, or any of it, like you disappear in it. This beauty of these moments is a big deal. Michelangelo, phenomenal quote, the sculptures and the marble, I just removed the excess stone. Oh, great. It's just such a fucking great line. It's forever. But there's a little bit different because there isn't even stone. Like, he's taking, like he's saying to Michelangelo, no, you're not. You're thinking, it's like, no, there's no actual stone there in the first place. Creation occurs without creating the subject in the first place. I just removed the excess stone isn't really the thing. It's excess stone gets removed with the foundation and the ground or the fertilizer that is the subject that's being used. The invention without inventor, production without producer, where everyone is mechanically part of the system that they're part of. Yeah. Then he says, this is just one sentence, because my thought enters into such a strict coherence with it that the invention of this sign, like, who invented it? Like, the intensive process itself did. It generated a sign adequate to its peak coherence. It did this. This is this intensive creativity, production without producer, right? Tomorrow we've got the Spinoza group, and it's like God produces infinite modes through necessity. This is not God choosing voluntarily to do this. That's for Spinoza. Klossowski is saying the same thing, that this intensive continuum produces signs through necessity, not by designing intelligence or by the intelligent pulling it out. Very new, so I'm far deep in. Thank you for time. Oh, Nathan, feel free to, we have a newbie section. We have a newbie channel here in the Discord, discord.gg/DGQC. You can literally ask anything there. And if you go to theory, we have two theory chats. We have one that's just a chat. The other that's more of a forum. Don't hesitate to just ramble in there and be like, here's where I'm having trouble, and just say a whole bunch of different things. Because literally everyone here, and Noah, who started, I'm proud to say, Noah started with a lot of Deleuze in this group and is exceptionally good. Like, it's been years, it's been time, and it takes a lot. But we have people who begin from a very, very simple place and make their way through. Noah hopefully will agree with this.
I love the DGQC. So
there we go. But we have so don't hesitate to be like, hey, I need some help, because that's what this place is for. It's what we do. So he continues. Does this mean that the thinking subject would lose its own identity in a coherent thought that would itself exclude identity? There's nothing here to distinguish the designated intensity from the designating intensity. This is like, so generally when we talk about coherence, we talk about the preservation of identity. Even I was doing that a little bit ago when we were talking about it here. Like, if we have incoherence, we have a loss of identity. And there's a weird shift that Klossowski is making the point here, is actually, it's not really coherence versus incoherence, identity versus lack, or whatever. At maximum coherence, you actually have identity loss, because coherence is itself impersonal. There's nothing here to distinguish designating intensity from designated intensity. That's it. That's the collapsing of every other semiotic structure that anyone's ever talked about. Like, that's just fucking it. That's the end of, as far as I'm concerned, that's it. That's like, oh, okay, cool. So every other semiotics just breaks fucking down. Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So, because normally, and he kind of talked about this, again, this is in a particular register. We're not talking about everyday signs, right? Because we have, Normal semiotics for Klossowski, everyday signs, we got like the designating intensity is the intensive state I am in that I'm using the sign from. Like the intensive state I'm in while using the sign. But the designated intensity is the state that I'm referring to with that sign. These are distinct. I'm in state A, describing state B. Easy. That's normal semiotics. However, at peak, there is no gap between designating and designated. Intensities designate itself immediately. That's it. So it's done. You reach a state of effectively pure immanence. It's intensive self-presentation constantly. It's a completely different beast. Jesus. Yeah, that's what that means. It's just crazy. And he says, there's nothing here to distinguish the designated intensity from designated intensity. To reestablish the coherence between self and the world is constituted by everyday designations. Everyday coherence is the use of signs to designate self and world. That's, again, what I was talking about earlier. This is why it's important, and I appreciate the questions, no, don't worry. This is why it's important with Klossowski to kind of just keep going, because he's making that point. It's like, hey, everyday life we live, we have ourself, the inside, the signs, and the outside world. It's great. Signs mediate. Signs create distance between outside and inside. This distance gives us the ability to have an identity. I am here at this desk, at Brooks's desk. I'm doing a thing. Don't go yet, Noah. You've got 2 seconds. You got to hang up for this last bit. You motherfucker already left. You son of a bitch. But when we reach peak coherence, when we reach this high Stimmung, this high tonality, this impassioned loss of self, there is no mediation anymore between designating and designated. That the inside-out distinction collapses, not as a loss of self, like, oh, I'm disappeared, but instead, the singularities of the self are distributed in it. And part of it. You can't stay here. You can't stay there. Because it's its own coherence. Right? There's no way to talk to other people. You can't practically engage. There's not a subject-object distinction where I can't have a conversation with you like this in that way. I can't communicate with other people. It would require sign codes that are shared, that not self-coherent. That temporality as a thing would have to exist that doesn't exist in the circle or in this high Stimmung. So peaks have to be temporary. Now, this is not a weakness. This isn't a loss. This isn't a negative. But it has to do with kind of the structural impossibility of sustaining this intensity indefinitely while remaining a functional fucking living human who I have to go eat soon, or you do, or Noah had to go do some stupid dumb shit. Whatever the fuck. Like, you have to do this. This is a functional organism doing these things. And it completely shifts the whole thing. So he says and ends, and we'll end here for the day, but it's a single circuit brings me back to the code of everyday signs. It makes me depart, again leaving me at the mercy of the sign. As soon as I try to explain to myself the event it represents. We don't live in two realms. This isn't peak intensity versus everyday life. This isn't the true reality of images and ideas versus false appearance. This is not noumena versus phenomena. This is instead one circuit with locally varying intensities and speeds. A continuous flux with local metastable relationships of signs, of objects, of subjects. Peaks where stabilization fails or becomes so self-stable and then returns to that traditional stabilization. But it's all a singular ontological plane that brings me back. Not I choosing to return. The circuit returns me. This is different than Nietzsche's, one of his versions of the eternal return, where there's no escape from the circle, or Spinoza's modality of necessity, where finite modes can't exit substance. It's always attached. This is a BWO, the virtual coexisting with actual in their way, not the Bergsonian, but in Deleuze's way. It's a completely thing, but it says, brings me back to the code of everyday signs, and then makes me depart, again leaving me at the mercy of the sign. And makes me depart. It's so, it's rhythmic. It's not state-based. This existence is this perpetual oscillation. Every existence is, but this is like intensive poles. This is not a resolution or a closure. This is movement, consistent and total movement. And then the phrase in there that's like devastating. Again, leaving me at the mercy of the sign. It's a lot. Because even at peak experience, if you explain it using signs, under sign systems power again, you're not mastering the signs. You're not doing that. They're mastering you again. Leaving me at the mercy of the sign, not beyond it as you were, not existing, but instead in that same thing. The impossibility of describing this peak is the impossibility of the peak. I really like it a lot. And so you have like the underlying way, and this is like Klossowski's ontology. There is a single circuit. A single circuit. It is all of the intensive fluxes that exist. They're always going, and they just have local variations. Those local variations, again, we talk about and we arbitrarily use signs for them, but they have peaks and troughs and general stabilization. That general stabilization is everyday life, where signs function normally, where the subject-object distinction is pretty clear, where I stays more coherent, where the designated gap of representation operates, and communication is possible. But then those peaks happen, and those peaks of intensity where the circle thought returns, and it's the totality of things where signs are depreciated, or new signs of signs emerge that are self-referential in and of themselves, not connected to that other thing, because the I experiences nothing. There is no I. It's the intensities experiencing themselves, and you are those intensities. Designating and designated collapse, and communication becomes impossible. Neither of these is more real. The schiz versus the normal everyday. They're modalities of intensities. The oscillation is the reality. I really like this fucking book a lot. It's beautiful. With that, I am going to finish up for the day on this one. Let me see if I can do anything on YouTube to see if I can continue Studio Mobile. Come on. There you are. Come on. As always, I appreciate everyone coming in, everyone joining these. It is the highlight, as I like to say, of my day. One moment. I'm trying to figure out if I can do anything on YouTube. It is not wanting me to function very well right now. That is fucking crazy. What a stupid fucking website. Made by a bunch of morons. Like, how do they fuck this up? It's just so fucking awful. Video details. What the fuck? How is that a thing? What the shit? How do I get to... You're gonna just, if you don't have to stay here if you don't want to, but you get to watch me be confused and stare at my phone for a moment or two. Yeah, Sunday's live. Sunday's always fucking live. I just get locked out. The moment I go live, it locks my screen. It's very frustrating. And then I can't do anything. Yep, that's as fast as it goes. And then it's locked. Wonderful. It's my favorite thing. And it's not even working on mobile. It's very frustrating. And the mobile app doesn't do a fucking thing. Okay. Please work, please work, please work. There you go. Okay. Now I go here. See, and this is the thing that happens. It's unbelievable. See, it says reconnect. What the fuck? It's so stunningly confusing to me. Stream query is currently assigned. What the fuck? What does that even mean? I've just got so much to figure out. Everything's falling apart. Like, I just want things to work, and I know that's like a stupid childish version of like anything, but it's like... It's like, you know, what the fuck? I just want to be able to log into my stupid dumb shit. So you can see, it's like logging, it's not logging in. It's not, it's connect to go live. And it's like, I am. And then it sends me back to this page. This is a fucking nightmare. This is Kafka-esque at this point. And I don't get to use that term often. So I'm using it, and that's the way it works. And then this, now my browser is completely fucking frozen. This is all because I fucking did a weird, I'm gonna have to like restart my YouTube account or some shit. This is just beyond frustrating. Well, go to Sunday. That's all I got. Go to Sunday. I love all of you. Thank you for joining. If you do want to support me, always great. Send a super chat membership, always fun. Patreon.com/DGQC. I'd send you to Sunday, but just you probably have a link already. It's not like you fucking people don't fucking hound us both to start drama and do all kinds of fucking stuff. So go there, start some drama with Sunday. Tell him that I think he's a fucking Philip Seymour Hoffman's look alike if he was more drunk. I don't know, that joke doesn't work anymore. That's why I used to say it was funny. But I'm tired now, and I've got to fix out my stupid fucking stream. So I'm going to go do that, and I will talk to you all soon enough. And let me just go ahead and stop streaming.